Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar. First and foremost, I wanted to thank you all for attending. My name is Serafina and I'm a facilitator at Circles. I am the CEO and founder of a wellness-based private practice called Intentional Simplicity LLC that also focuses on identity and community growth. I identify as an artist as well as a creative, and I go by the she and her pronouns.
Well, it looks like Serafina temporarily left our room, so I'm sure she'll be right back with us. Oh, there she is.
Hi guys! Okay, I have no idea what happened, but I'm glad I'm back. So we'll start again.
I'm glad you're back too.
So with me today is Carrie Cantrell, a fellow Circles facilitator, who will be presenting on how to overcome loneliness after a heartbreak. Carrie, would you please share a few words about yourself?
Of course. Thank you so much. So I am a social worker and life coach with my own practice, Carrie Cantrell Coaching. I really help people create emotional wealth in their life and truly a more meaningful life, balanced life while overcoming any sort of mind drama. I love helping people with their confidence and their self-worth. And I really love helping people here at Circles too. Just a few things about me. I live in Phoenix with my two adorable pups, and I'm a creative soul at my heart as well, Serafina. So I love being here with a fellow artist.
Thank you for that. Okay, perfect. If you're watching this webinar, that means you're either experiencing or having experienced being heartbroken. Don't worry, you're not alone. In a YouGov poll, 79% of people said they had experienced having their heart broken. That's nearly 261 million people who are dealing with heartbreak and heartache and who are unsure of how to heal and feel an increase of loneliness. Carrie is going to help us by presenting a number of stories and experiences to help us cope with loneliness after a heartbreak. For those of you who don't know, Circles is a leading platform for emotional support that ensures no one has to overcome life's challenges alone. It is built on the core principles that in order to overcome life's challenges, you need to be heard and supported by people who actually understand what you're going through. Our platform matches people who are going through the same challenges in their lives, such as the loss of a loved one, parenting issues, or even divorce. Each circle is led by a mental health professional like me and Carrie, and together they have a safe space to chat. We meet weekly via video and support each other through their healing process. So I'm going to go ahead and post an offer that you guys can go ahead and look into. It will also be there towards the end of our chat. Okay. Everyone who has attended this event is going to get a special offer from us. 30% off a circle, and most importantly, actionable tips that will help you feel better starting today. But before we officially get started, I just wanted to mention a few logistical things. This is a webinar, meaning there is a one-way audio and video. So you can see us and hear us, but we can't see you or hear you. With that being said, we don't want to not hear from you, and we will do our best to answer your questions. If you have any questions for us, you can go ahead and submit them through our box on your screen. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started.
Thanks, Serafina. Okay, so welcome everybody. Our webinar today is Coping with Loneliness After Heartbreak. And once again, I'm Carrie Cantrell, and I'm so happy to be here with you guys. So I just want to go through what we're going to talk about today. So just a few goals that we have for during our presentation. We're going to talk about the impact of heartbreak. What is heartbreak? What does it really do to us? And how that kind of plays into the loneliness that we experience. So then at the end, I really want you to leave with something tangible. So what are some of those tangible steps you can take to relieve your short-term and your long-term loneliness? Throughout our presentation today, we're going to take some mindfulness breaks. Those are great opportunities to sit, kind of think about what loneliness means for you. What role does it play in your life? So be ready for those breaks. It's a great opportunity to share. The chat box, put some questions in there, but don't be afraid to do that throughout the presentation because Serafina is going to help us get those comments as she mentioned. And I really want to hear from you guys. I really want to know what you're feeling and what you're experiencing throughout this time together. So and sorry guys, I have a couple dogs in the background, but throughout this, I really want to think about what is heartbreak. And heartbreak can happen when we go through a separation, a divorce, a breakup, a loss in our life. It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But at the end of the day, it's a grieving process. And we find ourselves in this place where we're just stuck. We're trying to reach goals. You might even think like you're doing all the things and you're not getting anywhere in that process. You're checking off the boxes and you feel like you should be moving forward. And that's what heartbreak kind of feels like. Let us know if that resonates with you. But often that leaves us just kind of sitting at a standstill. And it's because we've just went through this experience that's really kind of traumatic. Oftentimes, people in my circles are saying things like this. They say, I feel so alone. And maybe another way that I often hear that too is like, I've had a house full of people and now I'm living alone for the first time. So that's one way kind of people are expressing these feelings of loneliness. But another way they kind of express this feeling of loneliness is that they're just not getting the support they need. And we might hear them say, others just don't understand what I'm experiencing. So maybe they have friends and family that they're talking to often, and they're trying to express how they're feeling, but they're just not feeling like they understand. They're just not getting those words across to them, and getting the responses that they would hope that their friends and their family would be giving them. Or maybe it's just going on for a really long period of time and their friends and family are making them feel like they shouldn't be in that place anymore. And so these are where some of these statements come from people in my circles. But then I also hear people say, kind of these future focused statements of loneliness. I will feel complete when I meet a new partner, when I have someone new in my life. Why does he get to be happy when I'm still struggling? So there's lots of different ways that loneliness can come forward, but ultimately, people are telling us that they feel like it's never going to end. And that even brings me to this idea that people kind of say, like, these are feelings that I've never felt before, and I just don't know how to manage them. Regardless of which kind of loneliness, which statement you resonate with, this kind of idea that you're in a place that you've never felt before, maybe it's a loss that feels stronger or more prominent in your life. You've had other breakups. Maybe you've even had another divorce, and this is your second divorce, but this one feels different. This one feels stronger. It's okay to resonate with the idea that these are feelings that you've never had before, and you just don't know how to manage them. But know if any of these are resonating with you, you are not alone, because so many people are feeling this way. These come directly from the circles that I spend time in every single week. One thing we have to recognize is heartbreak is trauma. Let's say you were the person who was broken up with, you were on the other end of it. I bet some of the feelings that you might have experienced are things like shock or powerlessness. But regardless of whether you were the person who decided to leave the relationship or you were the person who was broken up with, you could any of these feelings on this slide, and many of them might come back to things like confusion, anger, guilt. You may even find yourself kind of bargaining internally. You know, did I do the right thing? What if, right? Asking yourselves questions that bring up a lot of emotions and feelings about the breakup, about the loss that you've experienced. In any case, in any situation, it probably feels like an emotional roller coaster. This is where I want to take one of these mindfulness breaks. Ask yourself the question, what are my feelings about my breakup or separation? Truly dig deep and think about what those are.
Carrie, thank you so much for all of this insight so far. I think there's a lot of meaning behind what you've been saying. And there's just like a lot of people who also are experiencing the exact same thing. I'm just taking notes because I find it to be very helpful. But something that you said was that really resonated with me is we're all in this together. So we're technically not alone because we're humans experiencing this. But we're also feeling very lonely. So it's like we feel connected. Someone just shared it's like sorrow, the lack of connection between that space. So very, very interesting.
I think you touched on something so important there, that we're not alone, like just that idea that we're not alone, but we feel so alone. And that's what we're going to get to, is how to kind of like bridge that gap of loneliness. So we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But that's such an interesting idea, and maybe just those people who might be kind of resonating on that idea right there, ask yourselves why that may be present for you. Like, what is the difference for you between feeling alone and actually being alone? Because I think, for instance, some people might be feeling alone, but actually be surrounded by a lot of people, while other people might be physically alone and not have a lot of people. So thinking also a little bit about what those characteristics of loneliness are for you as we move into this next section.
Yeah. Before we move forward, I
Mhm.
wanted to check in with Lisa. She shared that this feels like mourning a death. Like you said about the grieving process is what sparked for me. And Wayne shared that it feels like sorrow. And so that's also like a deep feeling to be in and feel that compelled continuously. So we're so close to actually losing someone when we have a heartbreak within that dynamic. That's very interesting.
And we do know that when people go through the loss of a relationship, they're very much likely to go through the steps of grief in a similar way as to someone who has actually lost someone from their life. So they're right on track. Yeah. Be expected to experience all of those feelings that is very similar to an actual grief. And as I mentioned, one of those feelings is anger. One of those feelings is bargaining, kind of asking yourself questions. Like, those are steps of the grief process. Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie.
So when we excuse me, when we think of all of those kind of feelings that you guys are bringing up, when we think of the emotional roller coaster that you might be on, I always like to bring it back to the result. Like, what can we expect to happen as a result of all these feelings? And if we don't know how we're feeling, or it just kind of comes out of the blue, or maybe at the really initial part of this journey, we're going to experience a lack of trust within ourselves, a lack of trust for others. We're probably going to feel really uncertain about a lot of things, our future, our housing situation, so the tangible things, but also very uncertain about ourselves and our emotions. And what this comes down to is it might make us take some actions um, that may not be helpful to the healing process. We might be more likely to isolate. We might be less likely to share or acknowledge our true feelings that are happening. And really, sometimes we participate in more distraction activities. Maybe it's watching TV, video games, like enjoying too many of those sweet treats. Not that all distracting activities are bad for us, but too many distracting activities, or making it really easy to participate in those distracting activities. These are the things that lead to loneliness. At the end of the day, if it's more likely or more easier to isolate, then yeah, it might be more easier to feel alone. So I want to give you guys some examples of people who have that increased level of awareness of what they might be going through, what they might be feeling, what they might be experiencing, versus someone who's a little bit lower on the self-awareness scale. So our person in pink, or our person on the left side of the screen, has a higher level of awareness going on. They're going to recognize that kind of uncertainty, or maybe even some of those other emotions that I mentioned before. And we're going to see that level of awareness play out in their actions. Now, trust me, they're not perfect. They don't have it figured out. They're still on the healing journey. But what that even looks like in the earlier stages is they're going to be figuring out how they can find support. They're going to be building it. We know that our support system might change a little bit when we experience a breakup, a separation, a divorce, any sort of loss in our life. Our support system changes a little bit. So they're going to be work on building it back. They're going to reach out to the people who they are feeling that supportiveness from. And we might even see them using a variety of language. And I'm really talking about like their self-talk language. I don't expect them to be perfect in that all the time either. One time they might recognize themselves having a really good day, and the next time we might recognize them having a really bad day. And that's okay, because they're kind of exploring what it looks like to heal. They're going to use language like, I'm really working on myself. I'm finding out who I am right now, because they have the self-awareness that they're healing. When somebody doesn't have any self-awareness and they're not kind of progressing towards reducing that loneliness or coping with that loneliness, or even on their healing journey yet, they're going to be just in avoidance. They're going to avoid the discomfort. They're not going to have any idea that they have the uncertainty yet. They may not even know what some of those emotions are, or put words on the emotions that you guys just did in the last mindfulness break. But what that looks like when they go to take action is overindulging in some of those distractions that I mentioned, withdrawing socially. So just saying like, you know what, that person's not supportive of me, I'm just going to stay here. Or, you know what, I don't want to hang out with people. I don't want to talk about this, which it's okay sometimes, but they're going to do that all the time. And they're more likely to overindulge in or more likely to experience unhealthy habits, even if it's not purposeful. So this is another opportunity for a mindfulness break. Kind of take a look inside and do some reflection. Which way are you personally leaning in your experience and your journey at this moment in time? Do you consider yourself to be a little bit more self-aware, or you're really struggling to figure out what that looks like for you? How are you feeling? Let
Yeah.
us know.
Mm-hmm. It requires a lot of, I think, practice to become self-aware, and it may be difficult to do so when you are feeling an increase of grief, because there are other emotions that are blocking what may be happening for you.
100%. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I I heard about the idea of uncertainty when you were speaking, and I wonder if that shows up within self-awareness and the lack of self-awareness.
Yeah, that's a great point. I always encourage people to think about the fact that, and it kind of comes back to something I was saying earlier. We don't have to be perfect. Like, we don't have to expect ourselves to be 100% when we have self awareness. We don't have to, it's kind of like running a race or running a marathon. We don't have to, like, know we're going to win when we're at the finish line. We can, like, kind of believe in ourselves in advance. And that's what self awareness is too. Like, we can know, like, hey, I'm not doing good at this moment, and that can be self-awareness too.
Mm.
And part of this journey is just kind of sitting back and saying, hey, you know what, at this moment in time, I am feeling this way, A, B, and C, whatever those words are for your emotions. And it doesn't mean that you have to overfill your day with positivity or positive activities. It's just saying, you know what, I could use a break today, so I'm going to stay at home. Tomorrow, maybe that will be a good day. That's where I even go back to, like, that idea of the emotional roller coaster too, because I think oftentimes what I hear from people after they've experienced heartbreak is that you never know what's coming around the corner. There might be that event in time that kind of causes a lot of your emotions to come forward and bubble up. And that's where kind of the skill of self awareness really allows you to avoid the the moments where it's really difficult, really where you could be at risk of isolating, playing a role in your loneliness. But if you have the self awareness to say, gosh, you know what, that paperwork coming through for my divorce, that really just brought up a lot of emotions that I didn't expect. What tools do I have available for me to help myself right now? And do I want to use them, even as a follow-up question? And that is what we're talking about with self-awareness.
Beautiful. That was amazing.
Yeah,
That was
thank
amazing.
you.
Thank you for that, Carrie. We have people sharing that they are self-aware and that they are in touch with what they are feeling. And I want to go ahead and give them the praise and like the encouragement that that's a wonderful thing to have during a heartache or during a grieving period. And I think that's just being really intentional about being present with what you are living and what you're going through. And so tell me if I'm wrong, Carrie. It sounds
Yes,
like self-awareness has a lot to do with being present, no matter whether or not it's a nice feeling or an uncomfortable feeling. It's just being present.
100%. And I think one of the reasons that this is so important to understanding loneliness, if you don't have this step down, it blocks the ability to even start working on the feelings of loneliness.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but you're 100% correct. Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks. So that's where we come into this idea of loneliness, right? Let's talk a little bit about what is loneliness at its core. It's a stress symptom. It's what we do when we're feeling distressed. It's something that kind of tells us, like, hey, something's wrong in our body and in our mind. I think you all know that. You've already said, hey, I went through this thing and now this is happening, right? And that's what we mean by a stress symptom. But really, it's letting us know when we're feeling this way that our relationships, our connections, our ability to be present or have people present in our lives is not where we want it to be. So it says here on the slide, social relationships are less in quantity, so the number that we have, or quality, meaning that the the amount that we need them to be in their presence in our life, right? So we know that when we have loneliness, a gap is present, meaning what we expect from people in our life or our connections in our life or our social relationships is not the same as what it currently exists. And that's all about our perception. It's all about how we see it. Then there's the ability to kind of step back and analyze it and say, okay, is my perception accurate? So remembering that it's all about our perception, which our perception is 100% our reality. But I also want you to keep in mind that in the grief of relationships, I like to think of loneliness as showing up two ways. We can experience it in the immediate moment or kind of this short-term feeling of being lonely. And if we go back to some of those quotes that I was using at the beginning, those are people who are feeling lonely right there in the moment. There are group members who are experiencing loneliness because it's the first time they've lived alone, right? They're actually experiencing loneliness in that moment because of the way their life has changed, because they no longer have a partner. And that is the immediate or short-term loneliness. Our long-term loneliness is more of like this idea or fear of being alone in the future, which we see often. We've just been through this traumatic experience, and now it's like, well, am I going to be alone forever? Do I have fear of creating future relationships? So just know that loneliness can show up in a couple different ways, a couple different places in our life. And with this being said, each person's experience is unique. So when you're looking for support and you're looking for connections and you're looking to talk to people, the way you feel lonely may not be the same way that another person feels lonely. For you and your sister, when you're talking about your separations, your divorces, your breakups, these things might be experienced differently for each of you. So what I really want to do is I want to provide you with some really tangible ways to work through loneliness. You know, you've all spent some time kind of helping yourself to dig down deep and think about where you're currently at. But the next is kind of thinking about some different ways or different ways to help yourself through the healing journey. So we're going to talk about some of the things that you can do. Know that there's a number of different ways to help reduce the loneliness that you experience. We're going to talk about 5 different ways today. The first one is to identify your feelings. And some of you have already taken that very first step in doing that. But here are some other ideas. You can talk to someone, journal, meditate, listen to music, or read a book. And some of the reason why these things help you, especially like listening to music or reading a book, is because it helps put our mind into a growth mindset. I know for me, when I listen to music, I'm like, wow, like this song really speaks to me. It helps me grow a little deeper into how I might think or feel about a person or about myself. And just like talking to someone, journaling or meditating, those things do it too. If you have ideas that help you figure out how you feel about something, put them in the chat box. And maybe Serafina can share some of those with us at the end. The second tip that I have for you is to reclaim yourself. So one of the things that I hear very often is that I've lost a piece of myself, or I'm not sure who this version of myself is. Exploring your identity after you've went through a huge breakup is really important. You might be living in a new place. You might be trying to figure out who your friends are. You might not know what your passions are anymore or your hobbies because a lot of your world involved this other person. So it's really important that you start back on a path of reclaiming you and exploring your self-identity, building kind of a new version of you. Some people just have to put back in little pieces that help them figure out who they are. And some people need to regain their power, their self-worth, their self-love, and kind of do like a whole new makeover. So only you can decide how much of this you need, but some ways that you can do it are to review your values, make sure you know what's really important to you, find some new passions, sign up for some classes, figure out what might interest you. Make sure that you kind of create a space, create space mentally and physically to know who you are. So mentally might be to kind of clear out the chaos in your mind, allow yourself some self-care time, but physically it can also help, right? So making sure that you're not in a space that has a lot of triggers or things that remind you of difficult spots in your life, right? So really allowing yourself to help yourself during this place and time and help you figure out who you want to be moving forward. And you can even ask for feedback from your friends and family. The third tip we have is to say yes and no. So I want to take this back to the feelings part for a second, where you guys kind of sat for a moment and tried to decide, what are those feelings that maybe you haven't uncovered yet about your journey? One of the things we talked about was how confusing time in your life can be. And even if a lot of people have it less confusing at most points in time, there are always going to be those things that bring up a little bit of confusion here and there. Maybe it's a random holiday. Maybe it's an anniversary. Maybe it's just a random date on the calendar or seeing an old friend at the grocery store. There's always going to be something that brings up a moment of confusion. It's okay to pause and think about what you need during these moments. And that's what saying yes and saying no is about. It's being able to set boundaries, help you express your needs, but also allowing you to even help you focus on reclaiming you by saying yes to people and things that you really enjoy. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Say yes to the things that bring you more joy in your life and say no to the things that drain your energy. Create a routine. So I know this one probably seems like a no-brainer, but I always like to think of it as, what do I need right now? Like, if I need a routine, great. If you don't need a routine, that's okay too. But what do you need in your day-to-day? Do you need a different routine? Do you need to rearrange your house? That could even be part of this goal, right? Anything that is going to help you kind of calm your life, bring peace into your life is going to be helpful. Now, if you have a family, if you have kids, I would really encourage this one to create a routine. Routines help bring stability. And that's one of the other reasons that they're really, really helpful. Not only are they going to be helpful to you, they're going to be helpful to the kids, and they're going to be helpful to your exes as well. And anytime that we are able to latch onto things that help bring us stability, it creates more positive environments. And it's one less thing that is causing chaos, confusion, or unpredictability, right? So making sure that we have routines and stability in the places in our life that allow it is really going to help overall. And the fifth one that I really want to touch on today, build and access support. So we know that loneliness helps can be reduced with connections, right? So the more that we bring people into our lives, the more that helps. But these other tips are the things that like build the less loneliness and build more connections indirectly. The more we know who we are, the less lonely we're going to feel, right? So if we can help ourselves feel a little bit more calm inside, a little bit more peaceful, then we're going to not have to sit in our loneliness as much. But we know our direct option for decreasing loneliness is to be around people. But you could be around a lot of people and still feel alone. We know that's true. So that's why all of these 5 steps are super important. But building and accessing support is one way and one commitment that you can make to yourself to really ensure that you're kind of like putting everything together, because people around you will help you do those other things too. And those other things, 1 through 4, will help you build and access support. If you go to a great class that's a big passion of yours to help you figure out what you like to do in this part of your life, you might have a great new friend. If you are trying to figure out your feelings, you might call and check in with family. So a lot of these are interconnected and depend on each other. But just know that building and accessing support can really be key to a lot of this process. And one of the pro tips that I have on this slide is to find people who reflect your beliefs and the person that you aim to be, because then that's helping us ground in that person that we want to be, meaning that it's going to help us find the characteristics and help us create that identity even more just by surrounding ourselves with the people who have those characteristics. So once again, just to review the ones I just went over. Identify your feelings, which you guys have already started today. Reclaiming yourself, to kind of explore your self-identity. Who do you want to be at this phase in your life? Say yes. Say yes to more things. Put yourself out there. Find some things that will help you find your new identity, but also say no and create the boundaries, because you don't have to live by other people's expectations. You don't have to do all the things. You just have to do the things you authentically enjoy. Create a routine to calm the chaos and find peace, and build and access support. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's even a circle. So for this mindfulness break, I want you to think about these different steps. I'm sure you guys have shared some really great things in the comment box. Maybe you have some ideas of your own about what you've done during these steps or what you could do during these steps. But I want to know, which one is the hardest for you? And which one should be your next priority? That's what I want you to really think about during this time.
Wonderful. What should be our next priority? I think a lot of the people in our chat are at that number one, identifying the feelings. And I am interested to see whether or not like reclaiming yourself would be a hard space to grow from, because it's a lot of identity work and really learning about who you are. And to reclaim yourself means to have a reflection of another person in a sense. It's like, who am I? Who do you want to be? I found your questions to be helpful, mainly because I think it is hard for us to see that we are transitioning, like you said, through up and down roller coaster, where we are in the journey. Wonderful.
100%. And I think that the reclaiming yourself and finding a new self-identity, like I mentioned, it's not like you have to start over. It's not like you have to start from scratch. I think that oftentimes with that one, people will talk about how they were able to go back to before that relationship and ask themselves, what were my values at that point in time? What were some things that I liked to do at that point in time? And that might be a starting place to kind of reclaiming their core identity. They may not fall right back into that pattern, but it definitely is a place to start, figuring out their identity again.
Absolutely. I want to just butt in. We had someone share that a place that they are currently struggling in right now is increasing their support. And I think this is a wonderful time to talk about the value of having a circle or a connection that really honors your values and your experience of life right now.
Yeah. So I currently during the week have 3 relationship circles. And I will just say, coming to my mind is one of my circles, and they are so well bonded. They are going through step by step every part of their divorce together.
Mm.
And they really jump in and help each other, not only with the tangible things like what does it look like? What can I expect? But they're there to support each other through the moments that nobody else understands in their life. They all have friends and family and people who are there for them outside, but they truly recognize that in their circle, these are the people who are there for every second of every day and truly can resonate with those emotions and those feelings and the emotional roller coaster that they're on without feeling like they're burdening each other too. And
Absolutely.
Seraphine, I know you have some groups too. If there's something you want to add, please do.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I love like the lack of burden, and I think people feel uncomfortable creating these new relationships because what they're bringing is a heavy concern, you know, a shift
Mm-hmm.
in their life. And so we don't necessarily have like friends or people who you care about necessarily who are going to be open to hearing your story 24/7 or as often as you need to share it. And I think there's something really special about having a connection that is ongoing and that can be fostered online and continuously and weekly. So thank you for that. Um, for me, I know a lot of my group members show up and they're really excited for another person to be there so they can hear a story and support someone. There's such a
Mm-hmm.
nice flow of feedback in the way my groups are run, and I value the fact that we really encourage people to come and share. It's your time
Mm-hmm.
to talk. You know, and I hear like, oh, I don't want to share my story, or I'm sorry for taking up too much space. But during this part, reclaiming you and saying yes to the things that honor who you are requires that you take that lean in into sharing your story and overcoming that experience.
I love that. Yeah, I definitely will resonate with they show up for each other each week.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think that there's a lot of things to be said in kind of number four, the routine, because I think it's the circle becomes a place of routine. They get to
Mm,
come, they know where they can like release everything, and it becomes part of the calmness each week for them,
right.
creating the calmness, creating the peace.
Absolutely. I was just going to say a great question that we received is like,
Mm-hmm.
what can we put into our routine? And like you just answered, a circle would be lovely, which is knowing that at this time, this is where you're going to go check in regarding this experience of heartache and loneliness. And so you aren't having to be overwhelmed with it during the other hours of the day because you're
Mm-hmm.
specifically devoting it to a time in your life, which is nice.
Yeah, and I think just going back to that question too, there's some other great things that can go into your routine. But I would also encourage you to ask yourself first, what do I feel like I'm missing right now? What do I feel like I'm struggling with? Because I always tell people it's not about doing all the things.
Hmm.
Sometimes when we're struggling with something in our life, we feel like we have to do all the things. It's kind of like self care is a good example. When people think of self care, they think I have to do all the things. I have to get the mani, I have to get the pedi, I have to like go get a massage. I have to, that's what people think of when they think of self care. But the reality is we don't have to do all the things. We just have to choose what's best for us. And I think creating a routine is really works the same way. So when you create a routine or you think about how I can create some stability in my day, which is really the goal, what would help you the most? So I'm not going to tell you to get up and go to the gym every day at 7 a.m. if you hate mornings, right? But sometimes people might add in things like going to the gym if that's a really great option for you. If you kind of feel like you're not sure of yourself and your identity, I would encourage you to add in like a weekly activity that you might enjoy just to see if you enjoy the activity, see if you can meet new people. Um, maybe you just need to get out of the house. I one time I heard this story about someone who wasn't sure if they could do something, so they wanted to start going to a coffee shop again. So they were like, I don't think I can do it, but I'm going to go for 5 minutes every Saturday, and maybe I'll work up to 20 minutes. and 30 minutes because it was something they used to enjoy. And so there's lots of different options, but I encourage you to think about what would work best for you.
Wow, that was a very powerful example. I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, and this is my last slide here. So if you have other questions, I encourage you to go ahead and put them into the chat right now. But I wanted to ask some of my groups, if you were talking to someone who was feeling lonely, I said, what would you tell them? Because many of my groups right now have been coming to group for a while, and they're very supportive. They know what to say to each other. They help each other out a lot. And who better to go to than the source and the experts of the journey, the people going through it? And so this quote kind of resonated with me the most. When you are lonely, it is the perfect time to get to know yourself, the time to dig in, take out all the unnecessary things, and live only your true self. So I really, to me, not only does this group member's words sum up our whole presentation today just perfectly, but I really think that it kind of helps us focus on getting to know yourself, choosing for you, reclaiming your identity, creating calm in your life, all of these things that we've talked about today to bring it back so that knowing that loneliness isn't going to last forever. It might be a feeling that you have for a moment, but being able to recognize it, knowing that loneliness can help you get to know yourself. And there are some things you can do to help yourself during the healing process. But ultimately, the good things will come if you just give yourself that little leg up. So now we'll take some questions. If there are any in the box or any comments that might be resonating with people, and we'll go from there.
First off, thank you so much, Carrie. This was a wonderful presentation, and I never really broke down loneliness like this. And it really gave me a new perspective as to how to shift loneliness. I feel like we have the knowledge, but we don't really have the actionable steps. So I love that. This was really cool. A few questions that we had were, since I'm alone, I have a lot of trouble getting myself to leave the house and create these relationships. What do you think would be a helpful, I guess, actionable tip for someone who is still in that phase of wanting to not take that step forward?
And that is something that so many people face all the time. So I'm so glad this question came up. I mean, and let's just like walk through how that happens sometime too. After we experience a breakup, a heartbreak, etc., it's so hard because we're used to doing things with people, right? We're used to going out, doing things, maybe going to a restaurant, a movie, like all these day-to-day things, even maybe the grocery store, depending on how your relationship worked. And it becomes so hard to know how to do these things on our own. So keep in mind that that's part of figuring out what it means to be by yourself. I've heard lots of times from people that, hey, I've never lived alone in my whole life, and this is the first time that I'm doing anything alone. In my groups, like this is something that happens all the time. And so I think that we get stuck in this place of like almost paralysis because we don't know how to move forward. And in this particular question, as I'm hearing it, is that, how do I go out because I'm kind of feeling stuck at home? And I think one of the best ways to kind of work up the courage or work up the support is kind of to build that inner confidence, the inner self-worth, kind of reduce the anxiety. So ask yourself if any of those things are happening for you internally. And if those things might be going on, honestly, I always think online is a good way to start exploring your what may be going on for you. And that even brings us back to a circle as a good option, exploring some support groups that can help work up the courage. I've recently had some members that were like, hey, I need some encouragement. And the groups were able to hold them accountable for going out and doing things just like you're expressing. But with outside of that as an option, I even think going back to that idea of what's something you really love to do. And how could you hold yourself accountable to that? Does that mean you have to commit to signing up to something? Does it mean that, maybe you might have to just say, oh, on Saturday, I'm doing A, B, and C, and doing it only for a few minutes, even if that's all the time that you can muster up with the anxiety and the confidence. Or maybe even thinking about some of those things that you used to do that would be motivating enough for you. When I think of that, I think of things like church, um, or school, like things where they're going to be welcoming environments. So if you practiced faith in the past, could you reintegrate yourself into a faith community in a small way, for instance? So sometimes those environments provide a little bit more comfort and courage than just going to eat at a random restaurant.
Thank you. That's a wonderful answer. And Alexandra, thanks you as well. I have one last question for you, and then we're going to close out. So this person asks, I know I need support, but I'm really nervous to talk about my struggles with my ex with strangers. How can I know that a circle will be a safe space and I won't be judged?
So I can only speak to my experience as a facilitator in group, but for me, my role is the guide, and everybody is there in a supportive manner. Everybody who comes to a group has no judgment, no has loving hearts and supportive minds when they come to groups. But I've had people come to groups who are super anxious, super nervous, and they've chosen to kind of just listen their first session and just kind of be kind of that fly on the wall. And the groups support them in that. And that's okay. Because everybody has been in those shoes where they've felt super nervous and super anxious to come to a group and be vulnerable and share. And oftentimes, people just share at their own pace. So, whatever that looks like for you, if it just means coming and saying your name and that you're happy to be there that first week, that's all anybody expects. If the next week you're able to share a little more, then that's so good. What I normally tell anybody who joins my groups is that normally it takes about 3 weeks or 3 sessions for people to feel less nervous and less anxious before they kind of get used to being in a group setting. Only because it's new, it's different, and these are people you don't know. So don't be nervous. Just come to group, try it out, and I can't wait to see you there.
Oh, thank you so much, Carrie. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I want to take a moment to really appreciate the fact that Carrie has all of this wisdom to share with us about such a tough topic. And with a pandemic going on and us just really needing support with the holidays as well. Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you all.
We also want to thank all of you guys for attending and participating. I hope you are all leaving today feeling better about having taken the first step in your healing journey. So now that you've taken that leap, the next thing I would love for you guys to do is to join a circle. You'll have a group of people who not only know exactly what you're going through, but are going to support you every step of the way. With that being said, we have a special offer for you. Using code SUPPORT30, you will have a 30% discount to circles for 3 months. You'll receive an email shortly with all the details on how to join, and starting now, you no longer have to deal with your heartache alone. Thank you again for joining, and have a good rest of your day, guys.